Some comic books. Oh, cute! Little Lego Daleks. Hi! No! This is just a scarf. My comics! Ah! Just a change of clothes? I can live with that. Hey everyone, if it wasn't obvious from that little skit and what I'm wearing, this week I'm discussing Doctor Who. Now if you're not aware, Doctor Who was a show that started in 1963 over in England, airs on the BBC. Did take a small hiatus from 89 to 2005, I want to say, with one episode in the middle there. But anyway, it's been around for over 50 years, so it's a very long-running sci-fi TV show. It's been popular enough that it's had several spin-offs, and it's had, almost since day one, it's had comic books. And I wanted to discuss a certain character from the Doctor Who comic books. Not the Doctor, not the titular character. I'm going to be talking about Abslom Daak, and I'll explain who he is. Basically, on the show back in 2014, there was an episode called Time Heist. It involved the Doctor and a team of low-level criminals doing a heist. Along the way, there was a guy named Sai who hacked into a database that showed a bunch of criminals. And what was fun was it showed, of course, some aliens from past Doctor Who episodes, but it also showed us characters from some of Doctor Who's spin-offs. Like it had Captain John Hart from Torchwood. It had the Trickster from Sarah Jane Adventures, and then it had Abslom Daak. Now he came from the comic books in 1980. That's what I'm reviewing here. See, back in 1979, there was a Doctor Who magazine, which is still running today, but back in 79, Marvel's England branch, Marvel UK, ran that. And it started as Doctor Who Weekly, became Doctor Who Monthly, became Doctor Who Magazine, but it's all just been a magazine about Doctor Who. And one of the most popular features that it had in there were 4 to 8 page comic book stories, original comic book stories, not adaptations of the TV episodes. And I'll tell you, they had some top-tier talent working on that. I'm talking writers like Alan Moore, artists like Mike McMahon and Dave Gibbons, like really big names. And in 1980, they did a ongoing serial in Doctor Who magazine by writer Steve Moore and artist Steve Dillon. It was compiled in issues 6 through 8 of Doctor Who, the comic book, which Marvel published here in the US. But these are basically reprints that have been colorized. That's what I'm going to be using for our review today. I was a big fan of artist Steve Dillon, and this was basically his first published work. He got his start in 1979 working for Marvel UK. He did a Doctor Who run for about 6 months. He did Hulk Weekly for a short time, but then he did Warrior, that's a UK comic. He had a little run on there that was very well respected. Then he became very popular in the 90s, working with writer Garth Ennis on titles like, let's see, Hellblazer, John Constantine. He did Preacher. That's probably what he's best known for, is his 60-issue run on Preacher. And Punisher. He had several lengthy runs on Punisher. I loved his artwork. And unfortunately, he passed away last year in October due to complications from a ruptured appendix. So he was only in his early 50s. That was a true loss to the comic book industry because he had great fundamentals, an interesting style. Steve Dillon was a great artist, and he co-created this character, Abslom Doc, that we're about to get into. So I think you're going to like it. Without further ado, let's get right into the story. This issue came out around 1980. That was the time of the 4th Doctor, played by actor Tom Baker, and he's actually introducing this story because it's not about him, so he's sort of acting like a host, kind of like something like the Crypt Keeper from those old EC horror comics. And we're set in the 26th century on Earth, where Earth is battling the aliens from Skaro. Now, if you know Skaro, you know which enemies we're talking about, but we'll get there shortly. So, this gentleman is called Abslom Daak, and he has been found guilty for 23 charges, including murder, pillage, piracy, massacre, and other crimes too horrible to bring to the public attention. Because of these awful crimes, Absalom Doc is offered two choices. He can either choose to be vaporized completely, or he can take decay. What's decay? We're about to get to that. But what's interesting about this story specifically is that it's very much set in the world of Doctor Who. You're going to see some of the hallmarks of a Doctor Who story, or at least world, and I'll note those. But it also subverts a lot of tropes because this character is nothing like the Doctor, and I'll explain those as well. Absalom Doc says, "Vaporization doesn't hurt. I'll take decay." So this is sort of a tough guy with a death wish. Obviously, he's got these criminal charges. We never really go into exactly what he did to earn all of those, but we know that he's an anti-hero. The Doctor from Doctor Who is an alien. Absalom Doc is very much human. The Doctor has had different personalities because when he dies, he can regenerate, but he's always a bit of a quirky gentleman. Absalom Doc, there's nothing gentlemanly about him. This guy is an asshole. He's dangerous. He's a criminal. He's nothing like the Doctor. And the Doctor always wears some form of suit. We're talking at least a jacket, but usually a dress shirt, a tie, a vest, slacks, nice shoes. That's what the Doctor likes to wear. I'm in the 5th Doctor's outfit right here. Absalom Doc, let's take a close look at what his costume is. Absalom Doc has long hair, an unshaven face. He's got big shoulder pads, some sort of a cape. I mean, honestly, when I look at this, I think of a lot of superheroes that were introduced in the 90s. Sort of badass anti-heroes. But what's interesting is this came out in 1980. So this predates anything we've seen from, say, Image Comics in the 90s. But yeah, this is a very original design in my opinion. So kudos to Steve Dillon. It is interesting looking at this artwork if you're familiar with Steve Dillon, because it doesn't have the hallmarks of the style he evolved. It's really great artwork from the get-go. I think that this is fantastic artwork in this story, but it doesn't exactly look what his artwork came to evolve into. An android escorts Absalom Doc to DK, and we see him explain, "You have chosen exile as a Dalek killer." So that's what DK stands for, is he has chosen to be a guy that fights the Daleks. The Daleks are always portrayed in Doctor Who as sort of the biggest, toughest enemy. They sort of look like rolling tanks, but technically inside of that is a weird alien mutant with little tentacles and stuff, and those are the Daleks. They pilot these sort of battle pods. We rarely get to see them inside, but we do see them in several stories. But that's what a Dalek is. Very, very powerful and dangerous. So when Absalom Doc says that he's going to volunteer to fight them, it's a death sentence. He's going to take out as many as possible until he dies. Androids, there's always androids in Doctor Who. That's definitely a hallmark because it's sci-fi and he frequently goes to the future, or even in the past there could be alien robots and androids and stuff like that. So this android talking to Absalom Doc is definitely something that you would see in a Doctor Who episode. And I'll throw this up because obviously this story is all about the Daleks. The Daleks were Doctor Who's most popular villains, still are, I would argue. They were introduced all the way back with the first Doctor. They were created by a guy named Terry Nation, and they've really benefited from having some excellent stories over the year. I would definitely recommend, if you've never seen a Dalek episode, watch the serial Genesis of the Daleks. That's a 4th Doctor story. I'm pretty sure it's on Amazon Prime. Great, great episode where the Doctor is sent back in time by his people, the alien Time Lords, and told to execute the Daleks before they really become the Daleks, and he's faced with a moral crisis of should he kill these people before they turn evil. It's a very interesting episode. The android takes Abslom Daak to a Transmat portal. Basically, that just means that they would teleport him from Earth to a world that the Daleks have occupied. Transmat is usually what they call it on Doctor Who. In Star Trek, they call it, beaming up, teleporting. It's all the same thing, but generally in Doctor Who, it's referred to as Transmat. And the reason they don't simply send lots of Earth armies through this is a lot of times the Transmat over this kind of distance doesn't work, and you're destroyed while being transported. They don't even know if you actually arrive at the destination. So even just getting there, Absalom Doc is taking like a really long shot. Specifically, the android talks to Absalom Doc and tells him that his odds against survival are 600 million to 1. I wonder if they took that from a line that C-3PO said in Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back probably would have come out a few months before this story was published, so the timing is right. That definitely seems like a C-3PO type of thing to say, and this android is a real fussy busybody, so I feel like they might have been influenced by that. Absalom Doc grabs a bunch of weapons, including what will become his real hallmark, a chainsaw sword, and then he casually cuts the android in half. He just detests robots. He hates just about everybody, but he really hates robots because they're kind of similar in some ways to Daleks. He kills this perfectly innocent guy. Now, the Doctor is a pacifist. He does not ever carry a gun. He solves problems with his mind, with talking, thinking through problems in unique and clever ways. But Abslom Daak, this guy is basically like the Punisher or something. He just kills whatever's in his way. We cut to the planet Mazon, which is controlled by the Daleks, but is the home of Princess Tyen, and the Daleks are forcing her to tell her people what to do. Technically, Princess Tyen is an alien. She's not human. However, this is something that you'd see in a lot of Doctor Who episodes. A lot of times, they simply didn't have the budget to create an interesting mask or design for an alien. So, they just have a person, a human being, and say that they were alien. The Doctor himself is from a planet called Gallifrey, home of the Time Lords, but he's an alien. His biology is different. He can regenerate, he's got 2 hearts instead of 1, a few other minor differences that's all internal, but he looks human, and we've definitely encountered plenty of aliens over the years in Doctor Who that look human. Princess Tyen is an alien, but she looks human. Now we start to get to the meat of the story. Absalom Doc appears, instantly destroys a bunch of the Daleks that were threatening Princess Tyen. He cuts them up with his chainsaw sword and asks who she is. They get on the same page, and he explains that he doesn't care about saving her people. He only cares about killing Daleks. I mentioned just a second ago that the Doctor wins battles with his wits, but Absalom Doc is completely different. He just cuts into these things. He just tears Daleks apart with his chainsaw sword. That's all he does. He just fights well. It's very different than what you see on Doctor Who. Absalom Doc and Tyen ambush a group of Daleks that are guarding her palace. And it's just a crazy, chaotic fight scene with him throwing grenades, shooting at them with lasers, while Tyen apparently warns her people. She comes back and says, okay, come on, it's time to go. But Absalom Doc is just caught up in sort of a bloodlust, and he refuses to stop fighting. So she actually knocks him out, and they wake up on a, what did they call it, a sky sled. I believe this is a bit of a Doctor Who trope, which is the Doctor always travels with a companion. Most of the time, it's somebody from Earth, and these days it's mostly somebody from modern-day Earth. But in the past, he's also traveled with aliens, he's traveled with robots, so he's had different types of companions, but he always has someone that he goes with. Now, in storytelling terms, that's probably just so that he can explain something to somebody. Whoever the companion is, and they change semi-frequently, like basically every season or every other season, they're sort of our viewpoint character. We're seeing the galaxy through all of time and space through the companion's eyes. But I think that Princess Tyann starts to fit that same role here. She's a type of a sidekick to Abslom Daak. So I think we're sort of hitting that trope. There's an interesting shot in this page. Take a look at this. There's a Dalek, and he's flying on some sort of a Dalek sky sled of his own. In 1980, we'd only seen Daleks rolling around. And there used to be a joke that the way you beat a Dalek is you simply walk upstairs. We actually didn't see a Dalek handle stairs until, I think it was 1989. It was a 7th Doctor episode called Remembrance of the Daleks. And you could see that the Daleks could simply hover. They had anti-gravitational abilities within themselves. They didn't need an extra ship or anything. And then when the show came back in 2005, they were flying all the time. They're just flying all over the place. But back then, that hadn't really been introduced. So this Dalek flying in his own little hovercraft is sort of a product of the time that's been retconned. They don't need those anymore. But at the time, it was just something that they couldn't really do due to budget constraints. Absalom Doc and Tyann are fleeing. They get hit by one of the Daleks and they crash land in a forest. As the sky sled crash lands towards the forest, Absalom Doc reaches forward and helps the skyship not just crash into the trees. He saves Princess Tyann's life. And she says, you know, why did you help me pull out of that dive? And he opens up a little bit. He says, I don't know. I guess you reminded me of someone with blue eyes. Anyway, it's too long ago to waste time with. And he keeps talking to her, and he opens up and says that there was a woman named Celine that he used to care for. It's subtly implied that he used to be a different person when he cared about someone else, and that his reckless nature is because he's so isolated and lonely. But I think that that's a bit of a subversion from what Doctor Who was at this time. Doctor Who is fairly sexless. He doesn't have a lot of romantic interest himself. Sometimes you might see a companion fall for somebody, or maybe there's some guest stars that are in a romance. But the Doctor himself never really showed much in terms of romantic interest for anybody. The closest was in the, 1996. There was a TV movie attempt. And the 8th Doctor kisses the woman that fills the companion role in that episode. But it's sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing more than a romantic thing. After that, when the show came back in 2005, the Doctor has had a few romantic relationships, but that's a very modern thing. Back in 1980, he was completely sexless. The fact that Abslom Daak is very much not, that he does have a romantic past, and I think that we can start to see that there's some romantic interest between him and Princess Tyann, is very different than who the Doctor is. In fact, Princess Tyann suggests to Absalom Doc that they could escape the planet together. She has a space yacht hidden in the hills. But Absalom Doc doesn't really want to do that. He goes, seems I like your homeworld more than you do. Anyway, he wants to fight the Daleks to the end. She calls him a brainless idiot, but she ultimately takes him where he wants to go, which is she knows where the Daleks' home ship is, and she shows it to him. Tyann argues as forcefully as she can that he shouldn't kill himself doing this. But he insists, Absalom Doc insists that this is what he's going to do. She starts to cry and says, you know what, I'm coming with you. And they kiss. Now, of course, this story is told fairly compressed, so there's a bit of shorthand. But I do believe in this romance for some reason. I really do. It seems tragic and doomed, but it feels real to me, real enough anyway. I don't think that she's exactly a damsel in distress. She was held prisoner by the Daleks and did what she could to keep her people alive in that role. Technically, she was saved by Absalom Doc, but she never asked to be, and she held her own. She's shot at the Daleks, she's flown the sky sled, and now she's willing to risk her life fighting alongside Absalom Doc to defeat these Daleks. So I really don't think she's exactly a damsel. Yes, she is in a bikini. That's not the most progressive design element. But she herself is not really a damsel in distress. I think that Tyann is a fairly well-developed character for such a short story. Over the next several pages, Absalom Doc and Tyen battle their way towards the Dalek home ship. At one point, the Daleks begin bombing them, but because they are all in tight formation with explosives, Absalom Doc is able to simply shoot a rocket at one of the ships, and it has a chain reaction, takes them all out. When Absalom Doc finally gets to the main door to get into the spaceship, he simply hacks away at it with his chainsaw sword. Kind of reminds me of Wolverine. The Doctor uses tools to solve his problems, never really weapons. His most famous is the sonic screwdriver. Basically, it's almost a magic wand, you know? He does this kind of thing, and usually that opens a door or shuts off a computer, does all sorts of amazing things. But it really always does stuff that you could do with real tools, and he simply has a sci-fi version of the everyman's tool, his little sonic screwdriver. But Absalom Doc does not use tools. He uses weapons and just hacks away like a barbarian. He's kind of like Conan now that I think of it. He's kind of like Conan the Barbarian in space. The rest of the story is primarily action scenes. Absalom Doc does stuff like uses a Dalek as cover. He drops grenades on them. They both shoot at the Daleks, and they ultimately destroy them all. Tyen is celebratory. She goes, "You've done it, Absalom, and survived." And Absalom admits, "Yeah, in a way, I'm almost glad. Isn't that weird?" And he says that there are probably still some Daleks around the planet to mop up, so maybe together they could work on that. And then on the last page, things take a turn. There was a soul Dalek still alive, and it shoots Princess Tyen in the back. As she dies, Tyen says, "I am happy to die in your arms, Absalom. But it should have been me. I was the one under sentence of death." "No, Absalom. For you, the sentence is harder. You have to live." And we finally see some emotion, some strong emotion out of Absalom Doc. He's crying, he's angry, and he says, "I'll do better than just live. I'm gonna kill every damn stinking Dalek in the galaxy." So that is the origin of Absalom Doc, Dalek killer. I thought he was a pretty cool character when I was a kid. I thought that he was a badass, maybe because it was so anti-Doctor Who. I already love Doctor Who, but the idea of such a tough guy in this world where, you know, it's gentlemanly wits versus wits for the most part, I don't know, it just added something that I really wanted. I just wanted like the high adventure, kind of like you get in something like Star Wars. So anyway, that is Absalom Doc. I hope you appreciated this review of his first comic book appearance. And we've got some fun stuff coming up. Until next week, keep reading comics.